on to the Tocris lecture.
Okay, well, thanks to both BPS and the Young Pharmacologist Committee for letting me be here today. Let me just start. Hopefully this is going to work. Okay. What I want to talk to you today about is how big the public space is to have discussions about science and evidence, and to share some of our experiences that we've had at Sense About Science in the last few years of what things we found useful and works when talking to the public. So I'm just going to start off by giving you a brief history of who Sense About Science is. So we're basically a charity that was set up to equip people to make sense of science and evidence. We were born in a baptism of fire. And actually, these are some examples of the headlines around the time. So it was just after MMR, BSE. It was around the time of the big GM debate, when the newspapers were full of claims that mobile phones cause cancer, chemicals are a problem, that GM's an issue. You can see some of these things, fears over gender bender chemicals in food packaging, Wi-Fi, all sorts of things like that. And what we found is that people often complain about media coverage and get frustrated, but not very often is something actually done about it. So quite often you'd find empty chairs. Scientists' voices were often missing in debates. I think in MMR there was only actually 1 or 2 people that the newspapers could go to get them to respond to some of the debates and claims that were happening. And when you look at kind of the information that's out there, when you look at headlines like this, you can see that information is really confusing and contradictory. If you remember the public, how easy would it be for you to get a reasonable picture of the scientific discussion and what the evidence was? How easy would it be for a mum to know whether to vaccinate her child or not with MMR? And it was pretty difficult. So it's very easy, I think. It's understandable that scientists are worried about getting out there. It's very difficult to put your head above the parapet. And quite often it's easy to feel you need all the information to know how to do this. So maybe you need to model people, and you need to plot people. You need to break it down. You need to model it again. You need to survey people. You need to survey again. You need to model it again. And you need to build all these pictures of model and risk and trust. But actually what we found is really effective. Whilst all these models and theories of communication do have their time and their place, sometimes what you need to do is actually get out there and respond to the questions people are asking. So part of our role at Sense About Science is that we respond to questions from people who are talking to the public on different issues. So that's things like local education authorities, patient groups, all sorts of civic intermediaries who are having to deal with questions on a daily basis. Generally, these divide down to these 4 categories. I'm just going to give you some examples to give you a sense of the type of things we deal with. So things like help me get to grips with this. We had inquiries from midwives who were responding to news that plasticizers and baby bottles were dangerous and having to deal with mums asking questions about it. Can I get something from scientists about this? That was a town councillor asking about Wi-Fi radiation. Is this another scare story? That was a woman's magazine on skin absorption and makeup. Is this something we should warn people about? That was a jobs agency hosting ads for clinical trials after Northwick Park. Do scientists work on this kind of things? That was a PTA on the option to site wind turbines in schools. Other parts is how much do we know about things like this? So it's TV celebrities on homeopathy, education, mental health groups asking about St John's warts. The balance of scientific opinion, that's something that comes up often with weather and climate, which at the moment is a very topical thing. But also a youth club on the effect of illicit drugs following a Newsnight programme. How are scientists split on that? That was a local horticultural society on GM superweeds. Legitimacy, so it's things like, is this a proper study? So that was a self-help breast cancer group on whether stories about underarm Jojots causing cancer are true. Teachers and reports of a scheme called Brain Gym that was used in schools. So this is just to give you some example of the types of questions we deal with. And actually we found that society is made up of a network of these civic intermediaries, and once you start talking to one set, you find there's a whole load of others. So, for example, on the case of the midwives and plastic baby bottles, we discovered that midwives have newsletters where they're discussing these issues. There are parenting websites and forums where mums are asking questions. There's the infamous Mumsnet that most people have heard of, where often these things are debated. And these are really great places to push this type of information out and to actually respond to some of these issues. This is just a kind of real broad picture of our work. There's quite a few new ones that I haven't put up at the moment. What we've also found effective is giving people insights into how scientists judge claims. So when you see these things, when you wrinkle your eyes up and go, that's really annoying, that's just completely not true, it's the type of information that you know in order to know that that's not true. So how do you know that? Why do you know that we can't lead a chemical-free lifestyle? We found that giving also people something in the process of scientific, how scientific research goes through is also really helpful. So things like peer review. And it gives people a pathway into the debate. It gives them something to grab hold of to start debating these things themselves. You don't have to be a gastroenterologist to look at claims about the status of MMR and question them. You know, you don't have to be an expert to understand some of the counterintuitive points about why measles fragments were found in the gut. And I think that's something that people often fall up on, thinking that you have to give people a science lesson, when actually what most people are looking for is actually the answers to their questions and information to help them make these decisions about their life and their health. So that just sort of broadly sums it up. And I think you have to imagine as well that you're a member of the public trying to make sense of it. And this is where we often start from. When we're working on an issue, we look at the types of information people are receiving. We Google a topic, we look at what's going on forums and websites, we look at what's happening in magazines, and we try to find out what the gap is between the public discussion that's happening out there and the discussion that scientists are having. So what they're telling us about their work, what they're telling us about what's wrong with the discussion, we try and bring those two things together. And we test it out as well. So we take these insights and tools that scientists are giving us, and then we give them to people we know. We give them to our taxi drivers. My sister often gets bombarded with things I'm giving her, and try and find out from them what's interesting, what's surprising, what's helpful. And we sort of move between the two worlds of scientists and the public. I'm just going to give you one example to begin with of one of the first projects we worked on at Sense About Science, and that was the chemicals debate. Now, chemicals is a really emotive thing, and you find that there's a lot of misinformation out there, particularly targeted at pregnant women and babies, I find. And it ranges from websites promoting products that claim that natural is better for you, to Pret a Manger, quite a mainstream company, claiming they've got no obscure chemicals in their food. Now, I'm not entirely sure what obscure chemical is in the first place, but there's this type of misinformation that kind of is pervading out there in the public sphere. And most people look at this and think, well, if these companies are producing these products, if they're making statements like this, there must be something into that. There must be true. But it's not just companies like this that are a problem. It's also, there's quite a lot of campaign groups speaking about these issues. And they're making the presentation of chemicals as something that can be avoided and eliminated, something that will harm your health and damage your environment. So you can see these are statements from people like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth. Just wait while I find the button. So babies are born with toxic chemicals already contaminating their bodies. Every ocean and continent from the tropics to the polar regions is now contaminated by synthetic chemicals. And that chemicals are threatening our health with a new kind of pollution that contaminates the bodies of us and our families. And it's easy to see why people are getting confused, why natural seems to be something better. And when we looked at it, this was what we found the three main misconceptions seem to be. And the problem is these criticisms seem to resonate with what people seem to be thinking. They seem like they're true, but the reality is very different. Everything is made of chemicals. Synthetic chemicals are often safer. And there is a great unfounded anxiety out there about different remedies that people are being promoted to use that often make little sense scientifically. And it's very hard to find what you need to know to understand this. So when we got a group of chemical scientists together and discussed it with them and got them to sit down, and the first thing they told us was this was absolute nonsense. So we went through this process of asking them, well, what would you need to know to understand that's not? And what came out of it was really interesting insights. Things like E-numbers is this big, scary word out there. You hear it often seen on kind of mums and parenting websites, oh, you mustn't feed your child E-numbers. When in reality, all an E-number is something that's been labelled and regulated by the European Union. And when you know that, that's not something that's so scary. And when you know things like salt and baking powder have an E-number, suddenly they start to lose this kind of scary appeal. Another one of our chemical scientists came up with a great example to make one of these points. He listed a whole number of chemicals, and it told us about this cocktail of butanol, isoamyl alcohol, benzyl alcohol, caffeine, geronal, quercetin. I can't even pronounce half of them. And he said, that's what you get in a cup of tea, and that's what it is. And that's a really great way to make a point, basically, to show that actually these sort of scary-sounding words of chemicals quite often mean things that we encounter in our daily life. The end result of this was a booklet, Making Sense of Chemicals, which we released back in 2006. One of the things that also came out of it is, as I said, we were looking for insights and tools that people could use to start to judge these claims themselves. And one of the big confusions you often see is there's often stories linking particular chemicals to diseases. So things like aluminium to Alzheimer's was a big scare story and continues to kind of regularly come up. So we were looking at a way to help people evaluate them. What tools could they use and what tools do scientists use? And what we found is that actually the Bradford Hill criteria is something that scientists use regularly. So it just sums up the misconception here. So we wanted to try and popularise it. So when we've spoken to Medusa, what we found is that links between chemicals and disease tend to fall into three areas. The chemical was present when the effect occurred, which is something that's quite often, but usually has no consequence. That the chemical and the effect appear to be related. So there's a correlation between dose and effect, which can be tested scientifically. And thirdly, the chemical causes the effect, which is obviously where there's a plausible mechanism. So what we did was we then worked with the scientists to go through the Bradford Hill criteria, bearing in mind these three kind of links, and produce a checklist that people could use to make sense of this. So this just runs through some of the questions we gave people to ask. So what is the status of the claim? Does the individual organisation have any experience? Where is the information coming from? To encourage a kind of scepticism about what type of information you're reading. Is the exposure to chemical always followed by the claimed effect? Does the effect occur in the absence of the chemical? Does there appear to be a relationship between the level of exposure to the chemical and the severity of the effects? And is there a plausible mechanism to explain how the chemical could produce this particular result? Does the evidence is presented fit the known facts or data? Now, this project was released, and it was mostly aimed at health and lifestyle journalists, because they're actually the ones who are having to deal with press releases about lots of these different products. And one thing we also found at the time was there are quite commonly held beliefs which actually make no sense scientifically. So in this case, it was detox. Now, every January you hear stories about you've got to go on a detox, it's a time of year to detox, you've had a lot to eat and drink. Whereas actually the scientists we were speaking to us were telling us this was absolute nonsense, that the best way of detoxing was just to trust your liver and your kidneys, have a glass of water and a good night's sleep, and they would do the job for you, which is really counterintuitive to what you see out there in the media. So we use this to basically release the document and to try and make this point. And what we found is that since then, every January, we get calls from the press checking this out. And it was also about, for them, knowing that they could contact a scientist on these issues. Because quite often, they didn't actually know that they could speak to a scientist. They didn't even know this counted as science. So we now regularly receive calls asking questions about chemicals and detox as well. And this just gives you an example of some of the press coverage that happened at the time. It got picked up quite widely, quite a lot of discussion. Some great pictures of some nice young ladies. And then this was also some of the more further debate about chemicals, natural versus better, that went on. So that's just one example of an area that we worked in, and just where it's kind of a pervasive message that's out there, and it can feel very frustrating and hard to combat these things. But actually there are things you can do to counteract them. But the next point I would like to make is also, don't assume a ship will always right itself. What I mean by that is it's very easy to get frustrated and see these things and think they're ridiculous. You know, why would anyone believe that? People will see through it. But quite often, unless these claims go unchallenged, they will remain. So I'm going to give you one particular example, which is one of the first things I worked on at Sense About Science. And that was basically an investigation into the use of homeopathy as malaria prophylaxis. So what happened was we'd been sort of told about that this might be an issue in this area and were sort of concerned about it. And when I first started about Sense About Science, I didn't even know what homeopathy was. I assumed it was some kind of herbal, natural medicine alternative. So I was really intrigued when I dug a bit deeper and found that actually there's no scientific evidence for homeopathy, and it is literally just sugar pills. And it doesn't make any sense scientifically. Now, a lot of people think, well, you know, this is a bit dodgy, but what's the harm? You often see these in boots being used for things like food allergy, for summer allergies and things like that, colds or what have you, what's the harm? But actually when it's things like malaria, it is an issue. So I went into a travel clinic to begin with. You know, this is just an example of the rough guide to travel health. So this is how pervasive it is you find that they actually recommend it as a possibility. So if you're a traveller going off an exotic country and you're reading your rough guide, you think, oh, well, maybe I'll take that. You know, not so sure about using, you know, drugs, what have you, might be concerned about this. So I went to a travel clinic, first of all, to find out what they would say. 45-minute consultation. Told them I was going to Africa on a truck tour where there's quite dangerous strains of malaria that will kill you. They went through everything in great detail, told me, you know, you might go to this country, you might need this, you should use this bite prevention, very detailed. I walked into a homeopathic pharmacy. I walked up to the counter and said, would you sell me something that I could use? I'm not so sure about taking the drugs my doctor's given me. Oh, yes, we can give you something. Does it work? You know, can I take it? Can I stop taking my drugs? Absolutely no problem, definitely. The whole thing took about 3 minutes probably. It was very quick. There was no advice given on bite prevention or anything like that, which is actually quite counter to what homeopaths often claim, and that part of what they're giving as a service and giving you great detail and normally long consultations. So I thought, well, is this a one-off or not? So I went into a further 9 homeopathic pharmacies, and in all cases the same thing happened. Sometimes they gave a little bit more advice or not, but in all cases they were happy to give me a homeopathic alternative and tell me it was effective and recommend that I could stop taking my treatment. One of them even told me that I would have a malaria-shaped hole in my aura, which the homeopathic tablets would fill. That was my personal favourite. So in a case like that, that's actually quite serious. And, you know, malaria can kill. If you catch it in Africa and you don't get to a doctor within 24 hours and you don't know the symptoms you'll be giving, which is part of what they gave me at the travel clinic, you could die of it. And I think what really sort of one of the things that hit home to me was I had a neighbour come up to me after I did this project, because it was followed up by Newsnight, who then really did a follow-up investigation. It went quite widely through the papers. I'll just move on to the slides. And she said to me that she'd been using homeopathic malaria tablets and hadn't realised there was a problem with them. She thought they were effective and there wasn't an issue with them, and she was really glad that someone had said, oh, actually, these things aren't good to use. So this just gives you an example of some of the media coverage that happened afterwards. And actually, this is now quite widely used as an example in the debates about homeopathy of where it can actually be dangerous. One of the things we found out at the time also, through going through the project, was that a new legislation was about to come through on homeopathic medicines. And basically this was being introduced by the MHRA. And what it is some homeopathic medicines going back in time before the 1970s have labellings on them which say they can be used for certain conditions. But a law was passed around that time which stopped that happening. So an EU directive came into force which basically gave people the option of bringing things in line in different countries. Now, and the idea was to either get rid of it, you could potentially, you had 4 different options you could use. You could do nothing, you could remove the existing old treatments that said that they had labels on them that said they could be used for specific conditions, or you could allow them to all have labellings on them. And out of those 4 options, the one that MHRA went for was to allow them to have labellings on them. So this was to have homeopathic medicines on them that would say that you could use them for colds, you could use it for diarrhoea. But you don't have to prove efficacy. All you have to prove is they're not safe. Well, if something's a sugar tablet, it's not going to kill you. And that was really concerning to us, because if you're a person and a member of the public and you've got different labels which tell you that something's for a cold or not, you're not going to make the distinction between whether it's a legal obligation or not. You're going to look at it and think, oh, well, if I can use it for a cold, if it says I can use it for a cold, I can use it for a cold. So by having very language on it that implies you may be able to use these treatments rather than saying they actually have evidence for it, people take that message away with them. So we actually work quite widely to raise awareness of it, and it's something we're still really concerned about. The Science and Technology Committee at the moment are doing an evidence check on this because they're worried about it as well. So I just wanted to highlight that as another example of an issue that's going on, where if people hadn't said something, it wouldn't have been a problem. And actually, I'd just like to say that one of the justification that was given for it, and the reason why they chose to eliminate the older, stricter licenses, which said you couldn't have provings on it, was to facilitate the expansion of the homeopathic industry. Well, no, I don't think that's a good enough reason to have these labels and that justification on it. So it's something that we're still kind of ongoing looking into. Now, it's not just necessarily scientists who are at the sort of top of their career who have a responsibility to get involved in these debates. Actually, anyone can. One of the groups that we work with is a network of young scientists or early career scientists called Voice of Young Science. They've all met through media workshops we run, and they all take a keen interest and responsibility for responding to misleading claims. And one thing was we came out about 2 years ago was all really fed up of seeing these products you see on TV, things you see on the tube making outrageous sort of science claims. Ever since Jennifer Aniston tossed her hair over her shoulder and said, "Here comes the science bit," companies discovered science is sexy, science sells. You see lots of these things around with words like nano, quantum, different buzzwords. So we decided we wanted to find out what evidence these companies actually had for this claim. So we looked around, we found 10 products that annoyed us the most. Just to give you an example, one was a product called aerobic oxygen, which claimed that you put it in your drinking water and it would deliver oxygen straight to your bloodstream, combating the problem of oxygen that had been depleted from your bloodstream through pollution and lifestyle. Fairly ridiculous. So that was kind of more the wackier side of it. On the other side of it, you also had mainstream companies like PrEP, which is one that I looked into, making these claims about no obscure chemicals in their food. Companies like Co-op and Sainsbury's who were choosing to take certain substances out of their food, not because there was any evidence to take it out, but because they were worried about public concern about it. We contacted the companies, and it wasn't about testing the customer services, it wasn't about making fun of them, it was literally just trying to get through to a specialist if we could, a scientist from the company, and trying to find out what evidence did they have for their claims, what justification for it. And what we found out is that in no cases were they able to provide us with any evidence. I'm just going to take you through one particular example. This was a CD that claimed to give you 34,000 homeopathic resonances, which it put into your body, into your biofield, which helped protect you against electromagnetic radiation from your computer. Now, they went throughout the course of the conversation, it turned out you couldn't measure the biofield, you couldn't measure where this technology worked. And then Victor, the person who made it, concluded by saying this about the evidence. It is anecdotal, which I think sums it up. And then he went on to talk about the fact they specialise in energy balancing, and they have a number of different machines and products that use the same technology that can't be measured, that test up project which has been very successful. And then he goes on to say that's what's made it allow us to pioneer this leading edge research. He then concludes with the scientific bit is always, if you like, secondary and always a bit behind. And I think that sums it up. Now, this might seem ridiculous. It's a ridiculous product. Who would buy it? Victor claimed to have sold 340,000 copies. That's £13 million spent on a product with no working theory, no conceivable mode of action, and no supporting evidence. So we released a dossier, there goes the science bit, which had sort of extracts of this conversation. And the purpose of doing it was twofold, really. It was partly to raise awareness that you need to question these claims, to raise awareness out there in the public, and anyone can do it. You don't necessarily have to be an expert, just to ring up a company and ask them, what is the evidence for their claims? What evidence can you produce? But also, one thing that came out for the project was that no one expected to be challenged. It seemed that out of all the companies we contacted, not one of them had seemed to be prepared that anyone would question these. Even the mainstream companies like the Co-op hadn't anticipated that anyone would actually say, well, what's your evidence for this? So they seemed really surprised that someone had asked them. So it's really important that people actually do these things, because the onus needs to be on the companies that if they are going to make claims like this, they should produce and be anticipating they'll need to produce the evidence for these claims. This just shows you some of the pickup from it, which it went, yet again, went quite far and quite wide. Everyone likes to put pictures of sandwiches and things like that in newspapers. And what we found since is that we've had lots of examples sent in. More and more people are joining in. People have started sending complaints to the Advertising Standards Agency. There was one recently about the term chemical-free, which was used for a garden fertiliser. We actually did a follow-up project last January, yet again picking up on detox. We wanted to go a bit further on what the other scientists had done earlier. And we looked into what we found is that detox kept coming up regularly. There was quite a lot of products out there. So we wanted to find out what these companies meant by detox, what toxins they actually remove. Because quite often you see, it's this idea of using this vague-sounding language you quite often come across when you see misleading science claims and these dodgy companies. And quite often they'll say, oh, it removes these toxins. You say, well, what actually toxins are those? And they weren't actually able to give you an answer. And we found out that detox meant everything from removing dead skin cells off your body to all sorts of things. And you actually could buy things like detox hair straighteners. not entirely sure what that's about. And they did fall into two types of products. One, on the other hand, you had products like the hair straighteners where blatantly they were just using it because they thought, okay, this is a sort of sciencey word, we'll put that in. On the other side of it, more dangerously, you had lotions and things like that, which made claims about how your body works. So, for example, Champneys and a few other companies produce something called detox patches. And the idea of these patches is you put them on your foot, and they claim that they can draw chemicals out your skin, and they remove toxins that way. So you end up with this gunky brown mush after a night of sort of having this on your foot. And it claims it gets rid of all sorts of things, nicotine, caffeine, etc. What they don't tell you is in the patches is powdered wood vinegar. Now, when you add water to powdered wood vinegar, it goes wet and brown and mushy. So if you put these patches on your foot, you put a sock on your foot, which they tell you to do, and leave it on overnight, your foot sweats, you end up with brown, mushy stuff at the end of it, not exactly removing toxins. And yet again, it was a similar thing to the previous budget. When we spoke to most of these companies, very little cases were able to provide us any evidence that their products actually worked. And as I said, it was more concerning was how they were misleading people about how their body works, claiming that they could somehow speed up your liver and kidneys and that you can combat an excess of alcohol by using these miraculous products. And that was one of the things that we wanted to really hit home on. So we actually produced our own anti-detox leaflet, taking the image of some of these detox product leaflets you see, but actually saying, you know what, your liver and your kidneys are the best thing, and the main thing you can do is rely on is have a good night's sleep, get a glass of water and trust your body to do it. Yet again, it went really far and wide, and it actually ended up creating a discussion out there. And often it's what some of these things is doing is about creating a question mark around these things, about creating some skepticism, about getting people to start thinking about what these actually mean. It ended up as part of a Radio 4 quiz question. My colleague overheard a conversation at Starbucks where they were talking about it, and one of them said, oh, detox. And the other person said, oh, haven't you heard? Detox is rubbish. And it's now, when you look around, there's discussions on this on teen health and weight loss websites to also gardening forums, places where people are actually considering these issues. So it can make a difference. This is just a slightly more serious example that I wanted to show you, which is something, yet again, our Voice of Young Science worked on. And this is where they'd seen a conference being held in the Netherlands, which was claiming to promote homeopathy for serious diseases. So things like TB, AIDS, malaria, life-threatening conditions. When they looked into it, what they found was that actually that this is quite a widening area, and they found lots of different clinics. For example, there's one foundation that's setting up 20 health centres, 25 mobile clinics, and 5 clinics specifically aimed at HIV and AIDS. And what's worse is they're actually claiming that the homeopathic products are side effect free, playing on people's fears, and also that they're a cheaper alternative, which in the countries like Africa, obviously money is an issue. I think is yet again, this is a serious example where something like homeopathy that seems ridiculous is actually a big problem where it's being used in this way. And it's making the lives of medics over there more complicated. People are having to deal with complicated political situations, lack of resources. And on top of that, it's creating this distrust of the drugs that they're giving out and creating this idea that somehow that this, something which is not proven to work is actually better. So what the Voice of Science did, they looked at see what the WHO had to say about it, and they found that actually there was nothing on their website, which is somewhere that a lot of medics and countries often go to for advice, big global organisations like this. So they wrote to the WHO, pointing out what they'd found and asking them to put a response together on this. It wasn't easy. It took quite a lot of chasing and prodding, but eventually they actually managed to get supportive comments from all the different disease departments, which was then endorsed by the Director General's office, who said that this represents the expresses the WHO's opinion. This was then sent round to all the health ministers in the world, and what they wanted to do was just to highlight the fact that the WHO had made this response on this and to make people aware that there was a problem going on and to look at what was going on in their country. So it just shows, this was, a group of them working through internet and email, ringing up and chasing, but had a massive impact. Now, that just shows you some of the examples. It went quite so wide internationally again, quite a lot of discussion on it. And we actually got a fantastic feedback. We've had a lot of contact from South African medics since then. Also journalists, because out there journalists didn't necessarily know. We're very lucky in the UK that a science correspondents here, although they're not always perfect, they are actually fairly good. And they do actually often know their stuff, whereas out in places like Africa, you quite often get general journalists who don't really know much about science. So actually for them, it was a bit of a revelation. I'm not always saying things are easy for scientists. You know, it is difficult to put your head above. This is some examples of some of the issues that scientists face these days. I'm sure some of them will resonate with you. Things like GM crops having trials being vandalised, animal research. You know, there's been a big thing in the UK. There's been some recent things like the libel laws affecting individual scientists talking out, and then the recent sacking of Professor Nutt. But actually, these things can be overcome. I mean, for example, animal research in this country. I saw an article this year where there was a monkey with a robotic arm. I think it was in The Guardian. Now, 5 years ago, you would never have had an article or a picture like that. But what's made the difference is more and more scientists are talking out about why they work on animal research and what animal research does. And actually, by talking a bit more publicly and more voices being involved in it, it's creating this kind of turn and open and transparency where people are more accepting of it. With the libel laws, it's something we've been working quite strongly on because it cuts through to the very heart of what we do. And we're actually pushing for reform in the libel laws at the moment. And we've actually got to the stage where government is talking about it. We've got a positive response. And it's only, you know, just initial stages, and we're still pushing this year. But we're hoping that that will be the end result. On the Professor Nutt sacking, post that, quite a few scientists came to us concerned about it who are working on advisory committees, and they've now all put together a set of principles which they're asking MPs to sign up to ensure that scientific advice is kept independent and give them maintaining that. And that's actually Lord Drayson's working at the moment, has released something yesterday, his own version of it, which there's still issues on it, but you know, people are working on it. But it could have easily, these things could have been left if people hadn't responded to this. If the issue of the libel laws was one scientist, a couple of scientists who had some problems, but when you started talking to people, you realised that it was an iceberg, that not much was showing above the surface, but when you look below, actually it was a huge problem. And now there's lots of people joined in. There's, you know, thousands of people involved in that campaign. But unless someone has started creating a kind of question mark about it and gathering people together, it never would have happened in the first place. I'd just like to kind of finish up, I'm not sure how much time I've got, but with one kind of last example, which is something that really resonates with me. It's one of the things we worked on where we had patient groups coming to us who were concerned because they were finding patients being bombarded with miracle cures on webs and forums. Stem cell clinics is a big one. There was a big one in Rotterdam which was selling unlicensed stem cell treatment, which got shut down but then popped up again in the Seychelles. And it's something they were dealing with. And it's very hard because these were patients with chronic neurological conditions like multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, people who there isn't necessarily an effective treatment, very little hope. And you can understand why they're trying these different treatments. And they think they've got nothing to lose. And that's really where we started from when we looked at I've got nothing to lose by trying it. That was what came out from our discussions with people. When you spoke to people, you found out actually there was a lot to lose. There was a lot to lose emotionally, financially, and it wasn't quite as clear cut. So we tried to work with the patient groups to develop effective tools to help people to look at these things before they invested their sort of money and their hope. It's things like explaining what a clinical trial is, why unproven treatments seem to work. And it was a really tricky project to work on because it's very hard not to be patronising, not to say just don't try these things, to actually understand where people are coming from. And we work quite widely and getting the language right. We tested it out quite a lot amongst working with the patient groups to test it out on the people in their networks. And what really came out of it for me was two examples at the end of it from talking to people. Is that first of all, lots of people came to us afterwards and said that actually that it gave them something to say no to well-meaning friends and family. So, you know, people like neighbours who were coming up to them and saying, well, I've seen this in this article, this diet, why don't you try it? You know, people feeling, well, I haven't been the husband I should have been for the last 5 years. Maybe if I just try this thing, it will help, you know. That kind of despair, really. And it gave them the ability to actually push back on that and say, well, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I don't need to try all these things, or maybe I should think twice. The other thing was we had one letter sent by a gentleman whose wife died of multiple sclerosis. And he said they spent the last few years of her life forever driving around, trying all these different cures, everything from the unlicensed stem cell cures to trying things like coke, paracetamol, to going all sorts to get a particular drug which is made from goat's blood over in Northern Ireland. And he said that he wished that he'd actually spent the money on a nice holiday and spent their last time together, and if he'd known what he knew now, he never would have gone through that. And I think that really shows kind of the value of doing these things and the importance of standing out. And when you looked at some of the material that was out there, I mean, these stem cell websites were full of endorsements, you know, charging £15,000, long lists of different conditions that they claimed to treat. And at the end of it, there was a tiny disclaimer saying, oh, actually, you know, we can't actually guarantee that this treatment will work, etc., etc. And that was one of the things we're trying to achieve with that project, was trying to make people a bit aware of some of the language that's out there, some of the ways that people are kind of push these things through, and just trying to get them to think a little bit before they actually commit to these things. One thing I would say we found from this project is Women's Weekly is one of the most effective ways to get information out to the public. Now, it seems crazy, but you do an article, Women's Weekly, you talk to them, they write something up, you get a lot of contact the first month. The second month, you still get a lot of people inquiring in. The third month, we still got a lot of people inquiring in. The project was a year ago. We're still getting people ringing up. And the reason is Women's Weekly goes into doctor surgeries. So it sits there for 2 years and people keep rereading the articles. So a year later, we're still getting phone calls about this from, you know, just individuals who picked Women's Weekly up and seen something small in this and wanted to find out more. So I would say, if you want to get something out there, Women's Weekly is one of the best things to go through. And that's one thing that, just picking up on my earlier point about networks of civic intermediaries, is quite often it's tempting to go for these big splashes. You know, people think, oh, you know, the way to get things out is to get a media thing with the Times, the Guardian, something like that. But actually what can be just as effective is getting information into sort of specialised media. So, you know, farmers won't necessarily have time to read a newspaper, but they might read their farming publications to look up to date technology, etc. So getting information into places like that can be just as valuable and can often last longer than getting the big media sort of high profile kind of campaigns. So don't undervalue them. I'd just like to sort of finish with the last kind of thought, which is, oh, sorry, that was some of the press from the project. Sorry. Redefining the civic scientist is something that we've sort of, you know, been thinking about for a while. Is like, what is this idea of the civic scientist? And actually, it's about trying to encourage people to take responsibility. So next time you see something you think, that's ridiculous, I think that's crazy, I can't believe that, or get really frustrated, next time your blood boils, it's worth thinking about what you can do about it. Who can you raise this to? What can you do? And it's not for everyone. Talking to the media is not going to be something for everyone to do. But there are other things you can do, whether it be doing talks with midwives who are having to deal with questions about whether a swine flu vaccine is going to damage a child or not, to doing these big profile media interviews, to writing blogs, you know, to writing a letter when you see an article in a newspaper you really object to, and sending it to that newspaper and saying what you think's wrong with it. Because the reality is, unless we do it, don't do it, there's no guarantee that someone else will. Okay? Thank you.